War Zone is a series in which we've been focusing on the devil as he shows up on the pages of the Bible. In this series, we've learned who the devil is, how he operates, and what his tactics and goals are, so that we can be prepared for his attacks on us. And we will be prepared when we put on the full armor of God. But before we get to today's episode, I want to thank those of you who support Time of Grace by engaging with the many different kinds of Bible content we offer. Video messages, daily grace moments, devotions, books, Bible studies, podcasts, and blogs. I also want to thank you for telling your friends and relatives about Time of Grace and for financially supporting the work we do. A big thank you. The Bible is incredibly interconnected with threads that run through it from beginning to end. In this podcast, I will uncover these threads, help you dig deeper into God's truth, and inspire you to live your life with greater confidence and joy. Welcome to Bible Threads with me, Dr. Bruce Becker. In our final episode of this series, we're going to dig into chapter 12 of the book of Revelation. In this chapter, we learn about Satan's grand plan. Satan is described here as a red dragon who wanted to destroy Christ and his church. This chapter sums up who Satan is, what he has attempted to do, and what he continues to do, making it a fitting last episode of this series. But before we get to the details of chapter 12, let's start with an overview of the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is considered one of the most challenging books of the Bible to understand. That's because much of the book is written in symbolic imagery, and the content is apocalyptic in nature. In other words, the book describes the end of the world as we know it. The author was the Apostle John, who had been exiled to the island of Patmos, located in the southern Aegean Sea. He was most likely exiled there by the Roman governor Domitian. There on the island of Patmos, the Lord God permitted John to see some amazing wonders, which he then wrote down in the book we know as Revelation. The book has a systematic arrangement to it centered around the number 7. There's an introduction in which John sees a vision of Jesus, and then there's a brief conclusion. In between are 7 visions. The first vision is of the 7 letters to the 7 churches in Asia Minor, present-day Turkey. The second vision describes 7 seals. In this vision, we learn about the church as it exists in the world. Next are the 7 trumpets. This third vision addresses the church in the church. It's about false teaching in the church and how the church is called to witness the truth despite opposition. The fourth vision is actually comprised of 7 individual visions. It speaks about the enemies who seek to destroy the church, yet reassures victory for the faithful. The fifth vision is about 7 angels having 7 bowls containing God's wrath to be poured out on the unbelieving world. The sixth vision focuses on the anti-Christian forces that seek to destroy the church, and yet Christ and his people remain victorious. The seventh and final vision deals with Christ's victory and Satan's defeat. Except for the first vision, the other 6 of these visions all end in the same place, Judgment Day. And each of these 6 visions uniquely describes the New Testament era in which the church proclaims the gospel message of Jesus amidst opposition and persecution. The opposition comes from Satan, from secular government, and also from false teachers within the church. And finally, all of these visions have the same outcome. Jesus wins. The church wins. You and I win. And Satan loses. Revelation chapter 12 is the start of the fourth vision, the one with the 7 individual visions. What we're unpacking here is the first of those 7 visions. In this first vision of the 7, there are 3 distinct scenes, and we'll look at each of them. Again, this is a vision that summarizes Satan's sinister plan and purpose to destroy Christ and his church. And since we are part of Christ's church, we are in his sights too. The chapter begins. A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant, and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. So we have a description of a pregnant woman who gives birth to a male child, and there is a red dragon who wants to devour the child when it's born. So what does this mean? Let's start with the dragon. We learn who the dragon is in the second section of this chapter in verses 8 and 9. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. The dragon is described as having 7 heads with 7 crowns on its heads, 10 horns, and a tail. Now, this imagery is a bit unusual. The number 7 is generally used in the Bible to indicate God's dealing with mankind. 7 is most often associated with God's covenant with his people. However, here and also in chapters 13 and 17, the number 7 is associated with Satan and those who serve him. The only explanation that I can think of is that Satan, as a masquerader, desires to be a substitute for the God of the universe, so he tries to look like God. The 7 crowns on the 7 heads are most interesting. You see, there are a couple of Greek words translated in English as crown. One is Stephanos, which means a crown or wreath of victory, like you would get for winning a race in ancient times. Yet that's not the word used here. Instead, it is diademata, from which we get the English word diadem. The diadem is a specific kind of crown. It was first used by the ancient kings of Persia. Then, when the Romans came to power, the first Roman emperor to use the diadem was Caligula, who ruled from 37 to 41 AD. Those who wore the diadem considered themselves to be God. Earlier, we mentioned that John was exiled to the island of Patmos, most likely by the Emperor Domitian. Although Domitian didn't wear a diadem, he did insist that people call him Dominus et Deus, which in Latin means Lord and God. So now when it comes to Satan wearing 7 diadems, he was setting himself up as God and claiming divine honor and power for himself. One more point about the dragon. Its tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. Now, this could simply symbolize Satan's power and influence. Or it could refer to Satan being hurled to the earth, taking 1/3 of the formerly holy angels with him. Either way, in the book of Revelation, Satan is described as the angel of the abyss, the angel of hell. So, who is the child in this vision? This one is pretty easy for several reasons. The child is described as one who would rule all nations with an iron scepter. This is actually a quote of Psalm 2, verse 9, which was a prophecy about the coming Messiah. It is also quoted in the letter to the church of Thyatira, one of the 7 churches mentioned in chapters 2 and 3. The child would also be snatched up to God and to his throne. This is a clear reference to Jesus' ascension into heaven, where he would forever be beyond the reach of Satan. So the child in this vision is Jesus the Christ. When the Apostle John wrote that the dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born, we are reminded of the many attempts that Satan tried to destroy Christ himself or undermine his work. We think of Satan inciting Herod the Great to murder the Bethlehem boys, or the temptation in the wilderness, or the numerous demon possessions that Jesus faced during his ministry, or how he incited Peter to suggest to Jesus that he shouldn't have to suffer, or his entering into Judas to betray Jesus. Simply put, Satan wanted to destroy Christ and his work. So, who is the woman in this vision? The woman who gives birth to Jesus. Verse 1 tells us, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. So, we might first think that this woman is Mary, the mother of Jesus. But she is not. Based on the context, the woman symbolizes Christ's church. Let me explain. Let's start with the Apostle Paul's letter to the Christians living in Galatia. He referred to the heavenly Jerusalem as being the mother of all the followers of Jesus. He wrote, "But the Jerusalem that is above is free, and she is our mother." Next, the woman in the vision is wearing a crown of 12 stars on her head. This crown here is a Stephanos, a crown of victory. And the number 12, or multiples of 12 in the Bible, always symbolize the church. For example, the 12 tribes of Israel were God's Old Testament church. Or think of the 12 apostles, the leaders of Christ's New Testament church. Or in the book of Revelation, the number of believers are listed at 144,000, 12 times 12 times 10. But the clearest evidence that the woman represents the church is found in the last verse of the chapter. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. The woman symbolizes Christ's church. The last thing that we're told about the woman is, the woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Ever since Christ's ascension, the followers of Jesus live in a hostile world. This world is not our home. Yet Jesus promised that the gates of hell will never be able to destroy Christ's church. Or remember in Jesus' prayer on Holy Thursday, he prayed for his followers living in this world. He prayed, "My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it." We may live in a cultural desert in this world that isn't our real home, but it's one prepared for us by God himself, one in which he will protect us for 1,260 days. So, what are the 1,260 days? In the previous chapter, there was a reference to 42 months, which is equivalent to 1,260 days. This is a reference to the New Testament age, from the time of Christ's ascension to the time when Jesus returns again on Judgment Day. This is the period of time when the church exists in the desert, until we reach our real home in heaven. This brings to a close the first scene in this chapter. Scene 2. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Our first question is, when did this war break out? Some Bible scholars identify this war as taking place shortly after creation, when God expelled Satan from heaven for rebelling against him. But let me share 4 reasons why I doubt that interpretation. First, the battle described here is not between God and Satan. The Apostle Peter in his second letter wrote about that war and battle, that God casts the evil angels into gloomy dungeons. And Jude wrote in his short letter that God kept them in darkness, bound with everlasting chains. The battle that ensued shortly after creation was between God and Satan. The war described here is between Michael and his angels and Satan. Second, the NIV translates the beginning of the scene with, "Then war broke out in heaven." The word for heaven can also mean sky, and can also refer to the non-physical spiritual realm. The apostle in his letter to the Christians living in Ephesus referred to Satan as the ruler of the kingdom of the air. Later in the letter, Paul told the Ephesian Christians, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." A good way to think about this war zone is as a spiritual realm. It's where the forces of good do battle with the forces of evil, battling for the souls of people. Third, all 3 of the scenes in chapter 12 occur during the New Testament age. Obviously, God giving Satan and his angels the boot out of heaven occurred at the beginning of the Old Testament, thousands of years earlier. These are 2 different war zones. Fourth, after Satan and his angels were hurled to the earth, a loud voice in heaven proclaimed, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short." Did you catch that? Michael and his angels triumphed over Satan because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. Again, the war is for the souls of people, and because Jesus shed his blood on the cross to take away the sins of the world, Satan and his evil band were defeated. This war took place while Jesus walked the earth. Just consider this. Before Jesus was crucified, he foretold his crucifixion and told his disciples, "Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out." Or remember when 72 of Jesus' disciples returned from their mission trip. They joyfully told Jesus, "Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name." Jesus then replied, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." And then, when Jesus rose from the dead on Easter morning, he went and proclaimed his victory over Satan. Peter, in his first letter, mentioned that after being made alive, he, Jesus, went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits. That's what is referred to in the Lord's Prayer when we say, "He descended into hell, not to suffer, but to proclaim his victory over sin and Satan." Finally, the Apostle Paul reminds us of Jesus' victory lap. He wrote, "And having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross." This war was won on the cross and because of the empty tomb. So there you have 4 reasons for when and why this war was fought. Which brings us to the third and final scene in this chapter. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. So the picture we have here is the woman, who represents Christ's church, flies to the wilderness, to a place prepared for her by God that was out of the reach of Satan. And just where would this be? Well, in the spiritual realm from where Satan and his evil angels had been cast out. In the spiritual realm, Christ's church is safe for a period of time described as time, times, and half a time. Okay, remember the 1260 days from the first scene in this chapter, which represented the entire New Testament age? And recall that in chapter 11, the same New Testament time frame is described as 42 months. And how long is 42 months? 3.5 years. Time, times, and half a time. So, Christ's church will remain safe and protected until Christ returns on the last day. The scene continues. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river, to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Although Christ's church is kept safe, that hasn't kept Satan from attempting to harm the church. Bible scholars have suggested that the river of water that the dragon spewed out of its mouth are the false teachings, the persecutions, the temptations that are directed against Christ's church. Even so, Jesus promised that the gates of hell will not overcome his church. But how did the earth help the woman? Maybe a better question is, who helped the woman? Recall what Jesus said just before he ascended into heaven. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Satan may be powerful in this world, but Jesus is still in control of heaven and earth. He protects his church that exists on this earth. When Satan realized that he was unsuccessful in taking out Jesus, God's Son, and would be unable to destroy Christ's church, the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. So, whom does he wage war against? Individual Christians like you and me. And the way he wages war against individual Christians is the subject of the next 2 visions in chapter 13, the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. Spoiler alert. The beast from the sea is secular government. The beasts from the earth are false teachers within the visible church. Satan uses both to attack Christ's followers. So, my encouragement to you is, put on the full armor of God and take your stand against the devil's schemes. War zone. Satan's war. Now this episode wraps up our War Zone series. I hope that this series reminded you of how real Satan is and how he continues to attack us. But more importantly, I pray that you have become more confident that when we put on the full armor of God, we can be successful in taking our stand against the evil one. If you have any comments or questions regarding this episode, I'd love to hear from you. Email me at bruce@timeofgrace.org. I also want to give you a heads up. At Time of Grace, all of our podcasters and bloggers will be taking the month of August off. So this is my last podcast until the first week of September. But don't think that I'm just taking an extended vacation. I will be using the upcoming weeks to work on my next book that will focus on Christians living in our current culture. Then, in September, we'll be starting a brand new podcast series, one that's a bit lighter than Warzone. In this new series, we'll be taking a look at the top 10 animals in the Bible. In other words, we'll be at the zoo. Thanks for listening, and God bless.